Jacob Trouba has a lot of ups and downs in Game 2 against the Hurricanes. We discussed the captain's performance, plus we are pulling no punches in our review of ESPN's hockey coverage.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1064 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get a $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So obviously the Rangers, coming off of an excellent, just thrilling, edge of your seat Game 2 overtime win against the Canes. They now, of course, lead the series 2-0. And Game 3 right around the corner, going to be happening on Thursday night. But something that a lot of people were talking about during Game 2 and after Game 2 was the performance of the Ranger captain, Jacob Trouba, and we weren't able to get to it in our last episode. Definitely want to tackle that here in today's episode. And Trouba thus far, 6 games. Obviously, the Rangers have won all of them. That's great. Something of an up and down run in the playoffs so far for Jacob Trouba, and I really feel like Game 2 of this series kind of encompassed all of that. When you look at some of the good things that he did and some of the not so good things that he did, and it seemed like the things that people were most upset about Trouba for were the penalties. He had 3 of those, and the giveaways. A couple of there's never a good time to give away the puck, but some untimely giveaways, including one that actually led to a goal. As far as the penalties, he had a high stick on Drury early in the second period. He also had a trip against Kokaniemi a little bit later, and then the big one. The one that stands out the most, because obviously it happened in overtime, might have even been double overtime. No, it was the first overtime period, I'm pretty sure. But he gets called for a tripping penalty on Necas. And this one was more egregious, I think, than the rest of the bunch, because there was just no need for it. The puck was in the Canes zone. And they do that thing where, team's in trouble and they just want to get out of the zone. They don't want to ice the puck. So what do? They lift the puck into the air and have it basically just plop down onto the ice in the neutral zone. And that's what happened here. Now, Necas was there and he was able to pick up the puck and he's heading into the Ranger zone. But Trouba, trips him down to the ice and gets called for the penalty in the overtime period. Of course, the Rangers they've been awesome on the PK. We know that, and they were able to kill it off. But there was just no need to take a penalty like this because Necas was by himself there. He didn't have any help from the other Hurricanes. They were kind of pinned back in their own zone. I don't think any of the other Hurricanes had even made it into the neutral zone when this happened. And on top of that, Gustafsson was there as well. So Trouba's kind of neck and neck with Necas, fighting for position and trying not to let him get away. But Gustafsson was back and would have, in all likelihood, prevented Necas from getting to the Ranger net. So not a good penalty there at all. And when you also consider the fact that not only did Trouba take 3 penalties in this game, he took 2 the game before that. He's got to reel it in a little bit. And he's not the only one. The Rangers in general as a team are taking far too many penalties. I know the PK has been awesome. It's been fun to watch them slam the door first on the Caps and now these first 2 games against the Canes and just excel when they're shorthanded. That's been awesome. A lot of players stepping up in those situations, but the Rangers cannot continue to give their opponents 5 power plays a night, 6 power plays a night, 7 power plays a night. It can't happen. Sooner or later, you play with fire for that long, you're going to get burned. You're playing up against a team that in the Canes has an elite power play unit. Hasn't necessarily looked elite through 2 games, but we know that skill is still there. We know that still kind of lies within them. And sooner or later, the Rangers have to get it together here and stop taking so many penalties. And Jacob Trouba is absolutely included in that. In Trouba's defense, though, it wasn't all bad. It hasn't been all bad for Trouba in the playoffs. There were some actual next-gen stats that were kind of bouncing around Twitter before this game. So they haven't been updated yet as far as, what happened in the other, the Ranger game and the Avalanche game. But going into the action last night, the 2 hockey games that were going to be played last night, this next-gen stat sheet, which I have mixed feelings on. I think they have their place, but I don't want to see hockey live and die by next gen stats the way that baseball does right now. So, mixed feelings there. But according to this chart here, it had Trouba and Gustafsson, that pairing, as the duo of defensemen with the second fewest goals allowed expected of any defense pairing on any team in the Stanley Cup playoffs right now. There was only one pairing listed ahead of them. Don't remember who it was, but bottom line, they were still listed second. And overall, I think that those two have played well together and have clicked together. And that's obviously a very impressive stat when you're near the top of the entire Stanley Cup playoff field, every single defense pairing in terms of your expected goals against number. Theirs is very low, and that's obviously a good thing. And if you want to be a little bit more of a traditionalist and just look at some stats that have been around forever, I mean, Trouba, through the 6 games, he's got 2 assists. He's also a +3. Game 2 against the Canes was the only playoff game thus far where Trouba was a minus in terms of plus-minus. He was a -1 in that game. He's also racking up hits and block shots at just a ridiculous pace. 27 hits through the 6 games. So basically, a little more than 4 per night, or close to, I don't know. It's basically about 4 per night. He's also got 36 block shots, and that is just a staggering number. In 6 games, 36 block shots. That included 9 in game 2. And you might hear that and think like, well, went to overtime, went to double overtime. That's part of the reason. Yes, but Trouba was racking up a lot of block shots early in this game as well. And somebody that's doing that, somebody that's playing that physical, somebody that's sacrificing their body like that, I'm not going to come on here and throw them under the bus and bury them the way that, certain Ranger fans might do. I mean, obviously everyone's entitled to their opinion. And there are times where I feel like, Trouba's game, he does make you a little bit nervous out there. There's times where it's pretty obvious he's not necessarily the best puck handler. He's obviously not fast, and that can kind of work against you in the playoffs because everybody's out there moving a million miles per hour. But the bottom line is overall, I think Trouba has brought some good things to the table as well. Just blue-collar hockey, sacrificing his body for the betterment of the team and out there battling every single night. And, we talk so much about how, K'Andre Miller has played a lot better since they broke him away from Jacob Trouba, and that is 100% true. But going back to what I was talking about just a couple of minutes ago here, Jacob Trouba has played better since being broken apart from K'Andre Miller. So maybe it's a situation where it's not necessarily either one's fault. It's more of a situation where a shakeup was needed. And look, Miller's doing better with Schneider. Trouba's doing better with Erik Gustafsson. And that was a move that needed to happen. And I'm really glad that Peter Laviolette had the foresight to do that. He trusted what he was seeing. He trusted what, we were all seeing, that both these guys are doing better when they're out there with a different defense partner. And I really feel like that's probably, you could make the argument that is the most important lineup decision that Peter Laviolette has made all season. Right before the playoffs, realizing that Miller's doing better with Schneider, Trouba's doing better with Gustafsson, and rolling with it. And part of the reason for that is Trouba got hurt for a while, so Miller was out there with Schneider. But, they put them back together for a brief time, and then they split them back up again, and that's the way to go, and that's the way the Rangers will probably look to go the further they go in the playoffs, as the playoffs continue on here. The other thing I wanted to talk about with Trouba, there was an incident in overtime that I have to call some attention to. We had a lot to cover in our last episode, and I definitely wanted to mention this moment here, but basically, Trouba's trying to deliver a hit to Necas along the boards, and, I mean, he's ready to just, run right through him, the Trouba train, right? And Necas kind of stops and ducks out of the way all in one motion. And so Trouba misses him, basically like lawn darts himself into the side of the boards, into the glass there, bounces off the boards, like hit the boards head first, bounces off, and falls to the ice. Gravity took over at that point, and Trouba's right skate made contact with Necas's helmet. Now, it wasn't the blade, which thank God. It was, more the front part of the skate, and that's where the contact was. I saw a tweet on Twitter that I have to call attention to because it made me laugh out loud. Now, it is a little bit of a dark humor kind of a thing here. If that's not your cup of tea, totally understand it, totally respect it. Skip ahead by about 30 or 45 seconds. But Pete Blackburn on Twitter, he showed a replay on his account of this moment, this attempted hit by Jacob Trouba here. And this is the what he wrote along with the video of Trouba doing this. This is what he said. I don't know if I've ever seen a play where someone almost kills someone else twice and themselves once, but I'm not surprised Trouba was involved. I laughed out loud when I read that, and we can laugh about it now because obviously both players are okay. It was kind of a scary situation, though, because obviously Trouba, I mean, he could break his neck hitting the board as hard as he did there, and obviously he falls then, and his skate is landing on top of Natchez, and thank God the blade, didn't make any contact with Natchez at all there. They're both okay. They got up. They were kind of chirping each other after that play happened. But again, it seems like they're both fine. And in all seriousness, I am glad that both of them are all right. But to kind of wrap up the Trouba portion of today's episode here, there are times where I'm a little bit nervous with Jacob Trouba for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Not the best puck handler. There was a situation in this game where he gave away the puck and it led to a Canes goal. Lafreniere, there were two bad passes in a row. Lafreniere tried to hit Trouba and it was an errant pass. And then Trouba tried to hit Lafreniere and it was an even worse pass, and the Canes took control. They got the puck into the Ranger zone. A couple of seconds later, they score. They go up 3-2. So obviously that was not ideal there. Turnover by Jacob Trouba. But again, you've got somebody that goes out there, puts on his hard hat every single night, wears his heart on his sleeve, plays the physical game, which we know how important that is in the playoffs. I bet that a lot of the Ranger fans that are critical of Trouba, it wouldn't surprise me to know that they're the same fans that always talk about, we need grit, we need physicality, and this and that. You can't have it both ways. Jacob Trouba delivers those things to Ranger fans every single night. The proof is in the pudding based on some of the stats that I threw at you guys a little bit earlier in today's episode. And overall, there have been some rough moments for Trouba. He's got to get the penalties under control. That is first and foremost. And if he can be a little bit, better with the puck, that's also ideal. But overall, I do think there's been more good than bad for Jacob Trouba in the playoffs. And if you're expecting me to come on this show and throw the captain under the bus in a situation where the Rangers are 6-0 in the playoffs and he's out there busting his tail every single night, it's not the right podcast for you. I'm just being honest here. And overall, again, I do think there's been more good than bad when it comes to Jacob Trouba. But there are some areas of his game that do need some work. And hopefully we see that going forward here. And Trouba, gets the penalties under control and is better with the puck. I think those are really the two big things. But we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. I want to talk about the Rangers and their 5v5 play. It's a situation that has been discussed quite a bit, throughout the entire regular season and certainly now into the playoffs as well. We'll get to that and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. First, though, let's go ahead and let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Indeed. There is no I in team, but there is one in Indeed, and that's the hiring platform you need to build yours. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed's a powerful hiring platform that can help you do it all. We streamline hiring with powerful tools that find you all the best matched candidates. Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job posts at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn on the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so like I said, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. I want to shift our attention to the Rangers at 5v5. And let me also just mention for the everydayers, next episode, we're going to be breaking down Game 3, whatever happens between the Rangers and Canes. I'll obviously have my thoughts on that game after it happens. For right now, though, again, 5v5 for the Rangers. There's so much talk among Ranger fans and general hockey fans that maybe for some reason or another don't think the Rangers are a true contender about what the Rangers are not. You've always got people saying things like, the Rangers are power play merchants and then they rely too much on their special teams. And then you get people saying things like, if you didn't have Igor Shesterkin and Artemi Panarin and Zibanejad and Kreider and Fox and Lafreniere and Trocheck, if you didn't have all those players and if you didn't have an elite special teams unit, an elite power play, an elite penalty kill, then your team wouldn't be as good. Correct. You are correct about that. When you take away the 6 or 7 best players on the team, you take away some of the things that the team does best. Yeah, any team is going to be hurt by that. But there's all this worry and like apprehension about the Rangers and their 5v5 play. And I kind of had an epiphany while I was watching game 2. The Rangers are so good on special teams and so good in clutch moments of games, whether they're up a man, down a man, or playing 5v5, that I think they can win the Stanley Cup, even if they are not considered a truly, truly elite 5v5 team. I certainly think it's at least possible. Look, if the Rangers right now, if you're going to give out grades here, if the Rangers are on the power play, an A+ team, and on the penalty kill, an A+ team, and you can't go any lower than an A. I'll accept A. You can't go any lower than an A for either of those two units. But I'm going to be as objective as I can. I'm going to say it's both A+, especially when you see what they've done so far in the playoffs, first against the Caps, now against the Canes, just largely dominating special teams play, game in and game out. So if they're an A+ in both power play and penalty kill, and they're, say, like a B+ at 5v5, well, that's a pretty damn good hockey team, is it not? I mean, you show me any team around this league that would grade out better in all three of those areas cumulatively than the Rangers just did, according to my grades. And, to me, it's almost like the Rangers are so good when it comes to special teams, such a good power play, such a good penalty kill, that there's this perception out there. And people tend to think that, like, they're bad at 5v5, and they're not. Now, I think they're better at the power play and the penalty kill than they are 5v5. And the stats kind of bear that out too. But, they've scored plenty of goals 5v5 during these playoffs. Both of Lafreniere's goals in this game, he scored twice. Both of them came at 5v5. We didn't even talk about Lafreniere in the last episode. And that's how kind of crazy it is as far as where he's at, because it's just what he does now. Lafreniere scoring 2 goals in a big playoff game, not really at all surprising. But to stay on track here and talk about like this whole situation, this whole perception as it pertains to the Rangers and their 5v5 play, you come into this this series. Let's look at the Canes. I want to do a quick comparison here between the Rangers and the Canes. So coming into this series, the Canes were actually the betting favorite to win the series. And I'm not going to go crazy about that because they're evenly matched teams. Both these games have been very close. And in the regular season, the Canes finished only 3 points behind the Rangers. But when somebody talks about the Canes and they talk about them being like a bona fide Stanley Cup contender and, oh man, this is the favorite, them and the Panthers, one of those two teams is going to end up winning the Stanley Cup. Look, there's nothing wrong with those predictions. They're both excellent teams. I get that. But part of the reason why people look at the Canes, at least from what I've seen, why they look at the Canes as bona fide Stanley Cup contenders is because, well, they're so good on special teams, man. Their power play is so good and their penalty kill is amazing. Nobody ever scores against them when they're shorthanded. They do that, and yet in the same breath, they talk about the Rangers as if, they're power play merchants. That's the term that you always hear. And you hear people, even Ranger fans, say things like, oh, man, they're in trouble in the playoffs because they rely too much on their power play and because there's no way you can win 4 playoff rounds counting on your power play so much. So what am I missing here? Why are the Canes like so revered and so like people are just in awe of how amazing this team is, largely due to their special teams, yet at the same time, the Rangers are like borderline criticized for being really good when it comes to special teams? What is the difference here? Like, why so much praise for one team, and why, for the Rangers, is it like, no, they're not very good special teams? It doesn't count if they score on the power play. Oh, yes, it does. And it's been huge for the Rangers in the playoffs, them continuing to dominate on special teams, even against a Canes team that, at least by the stats, actually finish ahead of the Rangers when it comes to special teams in the regular season. And look, with all that said, this series is not over. It's 2-0 Rangers. They're in a good spot. That's wonderful. Canes are going home. They'll try to hold serve in their building. The Rangers will do everything they can to make sure that they don't. And I would think that we will see the Canes play better on special teams between now and the end of this series. But again, I just feel like the Rangers' supposed struggles at 5v5 is greatly exaggerated. And I'm just confused why one of these two teams is, again, just so respected and revered for their work on special teams. And the other team, the Rangers, it's like, whatever, that doesn't really count. Maybe you guys can help me out with that. I'm not really too sure. But as far as like, the importance of special teams, because people, again, they kind of brush it off from time to time. Well, look at the overtime periods in this game. The Canes got 2 power play chances. The Rangers killed both of them off. The Rangers got 1 power play and they scored a goal and they won. And they're now up 2-0 in this series, largely due to winning the special teams battle in both games, especially in game 2 and even more especially in the overtime period. Special teams are not to be brushed aside or shrugged off. If you're an elite special teams squad, then you've got a good chance of doing some damage in this tournament. And thus far, again, long way to go. So far, so good, though. Rangers up 2-0 in the series, and the special teams right at the top of the list. I'd put it right behind Igor because he's been awesome. I'd say Igor number 1 reason, special teams number 2 reason why the Rangers are where they are thus far in this series. So we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second here. I want to shift our attention to ESPN. I've got a lot I got to get off my chest when it comes to their coverage of hockey, specifically this game last night, because I don't think it's been particularly good in the first place. Last night was inexcusable, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. First, though, we definitely would like to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and much, much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Okay, so ESPN, how about that job that they did last night in game 2? My God. So again, there's times on here where I will take, little jabs at ESPN every now and then. And we go from having, state of the art, just quality hockey coverage on MSG between, Sam and Joe, the in-studio analysts, excuse me. Everything that happens with the camera cuts, it feels like they never, miss anything. They've always got the right camera working at the right time. You get John Giannone behind the bench. I mean, what more do you need? It's just great stuff all around. With ESPN, I've been saying that I've been trying to be nice about this, and I've been trying to, kind of bite my tongue a little bit when it comes to some of this stuff. And I've kind of just left it as like, well, their coverage leaves something to be desired. What we got in this game last night from ESPN, the worldwide leader, was completely unacceptable. Everybody that was involved in the production, camera cuts and whatnot during this game should be absolutely embarrassed. They never had the camera in the right place. They at least got rid of that swaying camera. I guess that's the one thing that we can, give them credit for, because I don't think anybody liked that. And it sounds like they actually at least listen to the audience. I'm talking about that camera that's overhead and kind of just like, does this for anybody watching on YouTube and basically makes you feel like you're seasick. But all night long in this game, you've got ESPN cutting to camera shots of players sitting on the bench while the play is live, while either the Rangers or the Canes are zipping into the offensive zone on a rush. I don't want to see, Tony D'Angelo sitting on the Canes bench, yelling about God knows what. I want to see the play. I want to see what's happening. You've got the fight that we talked about in our last episode between Adam Fox and Jake Gensel. And all this stuff is going down, and obviously the temperature's rising. Fox and Gensel are chirping each other, trying to get at each other. Trocheck is in the middle there too. And we've got ESPN cutting away to a replay of something that wasn't even that important. And we as the fans can hear the MSG crowd, audibly reacting to something that's happening live on the ice during this play stoppage. And they were loud. I mean, you could tell, they reacted to the Jake Gensel sucker punch to Adam Fox, and we covered that in our last episode. If you want my thoughts on that, go back and check out that episode. But, they're showing a replay while Jake Gensel is sucker punching Adam Fox, and we hear the crowd, react and almost gasp loud to that. Fox was knocked down to the ice, and we didn't see any of it. Now, they eventually showed a replay, so, I mean, I guess good on that. Give them a point, give them a point for trying, showing the replay. But it'd be nice to see these things live while they're happening. The temperature is up, and you've got players out there struggling to get at each other, barking at each other, and they think it's time to cut away to a replay, once again, of something that wasn't even really that important. So there's that. And then we had somebody referenced this on Twitter. They said we almost had a Heidi moment. And anybody that gets that reference points to you. That is decades and decades ago. But we almost had a Heidi moment because the broadcast in the middle of a Ranger power play with less than a minute to go, in the tie game of a playoff game, suddenly cut away from Rangers Canes to bring us to the pregame skate of the Stars and the Avalanche. Nothing against those two teams. I'm sure they're going to have a great series. I'm going to have some fun watching that one as well. That game had not even started yet, and they cut away from the Ranger game to go to a pregame skate of the Stars and the Avalanche. And it took them about 30 seconds to recover from it and go back to the Ranger game. This is at the tail end of a tie game in the playoffs. A goal could have been scored there. We could have missed the Rangers scoring the game-winning goal on the power play. For that matter, we could have missed the Canes scoring the game-winning goal while they were shorthanded. They actually got a couple of chances when they were shorthanded in this game. Did the Canes? They probably created more offense shorthanded than they have when they've been on the power play. But the bottom line, they're cutting away at just an absolutely awful time. And then I don't know if somebody's like asleep at the wheel or what the deal is. How did it take that long to get the feed away from Dallas and Colorado and back on the Ranger game, which was live and obviously in the clutch moments there? So everybody missed about 30 seconds in the third period there, from about 55 seconds left to about 25 seconds left. Unless you were in the arena, I don't think it would have been possible to watch that game. I mean, there's other feeds and everything, but anybody watching on ESPN did not see that game. And then we're not done yet. The comedy of errors rolls on here. So you've got the overtime happening. Canes have the puck in the Rangers zone. It's the first overtime. Somebody in the truck, I guess, got a little bit trigger happy because the Canes took a shot, and it honestly wasn't like a high danger shot. I mean, it's overtime in the playoffs, so no shot is a bad shot, and you never know, when the puck is going to go in the net for sure. But somebody, like I said, in the truck must have gotten a little bit trigger happy because all of a sudden on the boards, they've got those digital boards now. The words "Canes win" appear on the boards. Hey, person in the truck, do you think maybe you can wait an extra half second to make sure that the puck actually went into the net? Nobody on the planet, except for this person in the truck, believed that the Canes had scored there. So another, just comedy of errors from ESPN. And honestly, announcers were really the least of the problems in this game. I know sometimes we'll all take a little shot at McDonough or Ferraro. They weren't that bad in this game. My only issue with McDonough in this game was he kept crowing about this record that just doesn't matter. Igor Shesterkin, I guess now has gone like 27 straight playoff games without allowing more than 3 goals or something like that. But he just went on and on and on about this. I mean, he must have mentioned it 5 or 6 times. They score the goal in overtime, the Rangers, and he actually had a pretty good call. I liked his call on the Trocheck game winner in overtime. And to his credit, he let the moment breathe a little bit. As soon as they come back, he's talking about, well, Igor Shesterkin now extends his playoff streak of not allowing more than 4. Nobody cares. I guarantee you, Igor Shesterkin is not even aware of this. And if he was aware of it, he would not care in the slightest. He's out there trying to win a hockey game. He's not thinking about, oh, I have to keep alive a streak of myself not allowing 4 goals or more. So there's all that. And I just kind of, like I said, I got to get all this off my chest today because we got to move forward, and ESPN, they kind of deserve it after their performance last night. So there was news a few years back that ESPN was going to start showing hockey again. And myself, and I think most hockey fans, were lukewarm to this idea at best. And there's a reason for this. And it's a reason that if you're under the age of, say, like 30, you're probably not going to fully understand it, fully appreciate it. So there was a time in this world where I'm gonna date myself here. No social media. There were no sport specific networks. There was no NHL network, no NFL network, no MLB network. Basically, if you wanted to be really plugged into sports, ESPN and by extension SportsCenter were your go-tos. You could either watch the game live, you could read about it in a newspaper article the next morning. You'd have to wait until the next morning. And honestly, as a kid, I mean, who wants to read an article, right? I want to see the play. I want to see what happens. So your options are basically watch the game live if you can, because there were times in the past where Rangers and Knicks would be playing the same night, and the Knicks would always get top billing, and they'd be on MSG, and there was no way to watch the Rangers. If this was years ago and podcasts existed, I would not even be able to properly do this podcast because there'd be no way to watch the Rangers, literally, other than going to the game. That'd be about the only way. But yeah, I mean, your options were very limited. You could watch the game live, you could read about it in the newspaper the next day, or you could watch SportsCenter on ESPN. And as a kid, there was nothing better than watching SportsCenter. You're waiting to go to school and you're catching up on highlights from the night before, and then you're talking about with your friends on the playground and whatnot. I don't think, though, that, again, people that are 30 or younger right now appreciate how powerful ESPN and how powerful SportsCenter were back then and how much they basically just dictated what was cool and what wasn't. And even in SportsCenter's glory days, even when it was awesome, when it was can't miss TV, and those days have long since passed, but even when that was the case, it always felt like ESPN was, just not a featured part of the show. And they'd have like a 90-minute episode of SportsCenter that they would, do the episode and then it would repeat itself a couple of times. They would spend like 2 or 3 minutes on the NHL. They'd bring out Barry Melrose every now and then to talk about, maybe like the Red Wings and Avalanche game. Those were fierce rivals back then. And he would do his thing very briefly. There was always this feel, though, of, all right, let's just get the NHL stuff out of the way and we can get back to talking about Brett Favre for the next 90 minutes. So whether they did this on purpose or not, it was almost as if like ESPN was basically even subliminally letting people know that like the NHL is not to be taken seriously. It's not that big of a deal. It's, the fourth sport that they'd always, have the football highlights, the basketball highlights, the baseball highlights. Hockey was always dragging behind. And so because of this, because of ESPN's, past presentation of the NHL and how they just treated it like an afterthought, it would never lead the show. And unless a team won the Stanley Cup, that was about the only way that any hockey story or highlight would ever lead SportsCenter, that it would ever be like a featured part of an ESPN show. Due to all that, there was a tough hill to climb for ESPN once they started covering hockey again, once they started having games back on their network. Very steep hill to climb to kind of rebuild the trust between themselves and fans of hockey. And they have done a terrible job of doing so. Their only real hope to like really get fans behind them and, oh man, ESPN's doing a great job with this hockey coverage. They had to hit the ground running. They had to knock it out of the park right off the bat. They had to treat it like it was special, have people in there that know what they're talking about, have people in there that are passionate hockey people, present it like it's a big deal, present hockey for what it is. It's just an epic struggle between two teams, especially in the playoffs, attempting to do everything they can to be the last team standing and win the Stanley Cup. And because they didn't do that, and because they continue to struggle after a couple of years of hockey being back on ESPN, nobody likes watching the NHL on ESPN. I mean, and I'm not going to say that like, because we pick on McDonough and Ferraro every now and then. There's people that like them, and that's completely fine. There might be people listening to this that like them. If you're a big fan of those guys, more power to you. That's awesome. But it goes beyond just the announcers. Just their presentation of the game just has not been good. And I think for the majority of NHL fans, when you see that like, oh, the game's going to be on TNT tonight, or like for the first round, Sam and Joe are going to have the call on MSG, you just kind of let out a sigh of relief. It's like anything and anybody but ESPN. So bottom line, last night was not good enough from ESPN, the worldwide leader. Just a comedy of errors, just mistake after mistake after mistake. And look, I realize it's not an easy job. It's live sports. It's not easy to do that. I get all those things, but all these other networks seem to do infinitely better than ESPN does. And hockey's been back on ESPN for a couple of years now. It's time to figure it out. It's time to be better than this. It's time to deliver quality hockey coverage to fans that love NHL hockey and fans that love the Stanley Cup playoffs. So rant over. I'm going to do my best to kind of limit my critiques of ESPN going forward. I mean, hey, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything, right? But at a certain point here, you got to get it off your chest. I was fed up with all this nonsense by the end of this game. We could have missed a playoff game-winning goal at the end of the third period due to that cutaway. We missed God only knows how much other stuff because they're cutting away to this camera, going to a replay when they shouldn't be, just over and over and over again. Their coverage has not been great, but I thought last night was egregiously bad, if I'm being completely honest, which I believe I have been. So that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.